everybody, and welcome. Today I'm going to be focusing on a relatively underappreciated aspect of board gaming, which are the expansions. Expansions for board games have been around for a very long time, but the thing is that there are some that are really good and some that are not so good. So what I wanted to do today is to go over my favorite 5 expansions. Now, the way that I did this is a little bit of both mechanics as well as just the general theming as well. So I wanted to look at several aspects. I wanted to look at how the mechanics integrate with the previous game, if the new mechanics are fun, if they're enjoyable, if I can actually work with them, all that kind of stuff. If the theming still sort of keeps along, although that's not really that difficult to do. And finally, does it make the game more enjoyable? That's really the biggest thing with expansions. Because one of the issues that we can have with board games is that you play it so often that it becomes not necessarily stale, but it can potentially start to repeat itself. Although many games have a lot of different options and ways to mitigate that, some of them just don't, or they're not as good at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over my favorite 5 expansions and talk about why they're my favorite expansions, what they add, how they change the game, and all of those good things. So we'll go ahead and get started right off with my number 5. At number 5, I have a game that I actually somewhat ironically chastised because of the way that it does expansions as well as its base game. This is Smash Up the Big Geeky Box. So originally in one of my older videos that you may have seen where I talked about my top 5, or quote-unquote top 5, least favorite things about gaming, I talked about Smash Up in terms of the base game where it had a lot of empty slots that you could fit all of the expansions into, or at least some of the expansions, because there were a lot of expansions that added all sorts of factions and all that kind of stuff. And then came along the Big Geeky Box. Now this did a little bit of both of what I had talked about in my previous disgruntled video, where you have not only the ability to fit all of the expansions as well as the base game, but it has extra room for additional expansions that are still on the way. The thing is that I still really enjoy this expansion. This is the way that I prefer to have all of my stuff put together. I like having a single expansion that can fit everything before it. And not only that, but the game itself, the Big Geeky Box, actually adds some really cool things. It adds little dividers, actual little plastic dividers, so that you can you're better able to not only separate, but also to have all the cards put together and all that kind of stuff. It makes it a lot easier. It also adds the Geek Faction deck, which I personally am not really that much of a fan of, but regardless, it's still there. And last but certainly not least, it makes it a relatively compact game. Whereas before, if you had more expansions than the base set can fill, then you're in big trouble because you either have to bring more boxes or you have to try to figure out how to combine them into the single slots, all that kind of stuff. Doesn't really work. But the Big Geeky Box solves all of that, and it lets you have everything in a single, relatively compact box. In addition, the expansions themselves to Smash Up individually I really enjoy as well, primarily because they gave the little counters for how many points you have, because the base set didn't have any, and it became a real annoyance to try to figure out how many points you had. But regardless, Smash Up the Big Geeky Box is my number 5 expansion. Next up, I have a physically small but very important expansion to one of my favorite games, Ticket to Ride. The expansion is the 1910 expansion. You can see it's very tiny, but this made some very important changes to the game itself that made it much easier to play. The biggest change is actually also the biggest change, where the original cards, the original train cards in Ticket to Ride were about that big. They were probably about 3 or 4 inches by about an inch or so. They were super tiny. They were really frustrating to hold. So what 1910 did in part is make those full-size cards. So while they're not as easy to hold as the little tiny ones, they're so much easier to see and just generally a lot easier to deal with. In addition, we got a lot more of the route cards, which means that we have a lot more versatility in terms of what we can try to accomplish and all that kind of stuff. It's a very small expansion with some very major and very important and very welcome changes to the original game. But regardless, for all those reasons, 1910, the expansion for Ticket to Ride, is my number 4. At number 3, I have an expansion that sort of exemplifies some of the things that I really enjoy about expansions in board games. The expansion itself is Kingsburg to Forge a Realm. So one of the reasons that I love this so much, and one of my favorite things about some expansions, is that it is modular. So what does that mean? It means that you have a bunch of individual parts of the expansion that you can either choose to use or not use. You can see on the back, it actually has images of all of the individual parts that you can end up using. You have new images for your buildings. You can actually add on to those. You also have new cards that you can actually get that are additional nobles, essentially. You have a different way of doing the soldier round, or the soldier phase at the very end, so that you have individual tokens that say how many soldiers you get sent by the king, or how many the king sends, rather. And then you also have individual strips of buildings that can cover up or be added to the original cards. There's a lot of different ways that you can play this, and again, because it's modular, because it has each of those things that exist independent of one another, it means that you can pick and choose exactly how you want to play. Not only does this add a lot of new mechanics that all work very well together, they also work very well separately. And that's what I really love about this particular expansion, and several others as well. But this particular one, I love it. It really sort of rekindled my my fire with Kingsburg itself. So Kingsburg to Forge a Realm, my number 3. At number 2, I have an expansion for a game that I haven't really talked about in a pretty long time, but the expansion itself added a lot that I really enjoy about the game, and the game itself I also really enjoy. The game is Race for the Galaxy, and this is actually the first expansion, The Gathering Storm. One of the biggest things that I love about this expansion is it added the solo rules. I love Race for the Galaxy solo. I know that I'm probably in the minority on that because it is fairly convoluted and it can be very difficult to figure out the first couple of times that you're playing it, but this is where it all started, is The Gathering Storm. It added a ton of versatility to the game, being able to play by yourself, being able to use the solo rules, and it also added a lot of new planet cards, or not necessarily planet cards, but it added just a bunch of cards in general, a bunch of new cards for the deck. So it not only did it add on to what the original game had in terms of adding more planets, more versatility, all that kind of stuff, but it also added the brand new mechanic of the solo play, which is really fun, and for me personally makes it a very enjoyable game. Not quite as much as playing with other players, but still a very good game overall. Race for the Galaxy, The Gathering Storm, my number 2 expansion. At number 1, I've got an expansion for my favorite co-op game of all time. That's right, if you have seen the video before, then you know the game is Pandemic and the expansion is On the Brink. Now you may notice I do have the old version of On the Brink. That's because I'm super cool and I got it before the second edition was released. But regardless, On the Brink is absolutely amazing. Not only does it combine several aspects of expansions that I really enjoy, including being able to do the modular expansion, but it also adds some of the best pieces that I ever seen. It adds little petri dishes that you can keep the not only the disease cubes, but also all of the player tokens, the pawn tokens, and all of that other stuff. It adds all of that in this one expansion. It's wonderful. It's so cool. It's a great way to expand on the game, and again, it is a modular expansion, so you see a lot of new really cool stuff. You do see the integration of the sort of trader mechanic, quote unquote. It's the bioterrorist, which isn't really a traitor because you know who the bioterrorist is, you just don't know what they're doing. But regardless, it's an entirely new way to play, and it changes vastly the way that you can play it. It's a lot of fun, and on top of that, you also add the new disease, the purple disease, so you have a bunch of other ways that you can play. Again, similarly to Forge a Realm, you have a relatively modular expansion. The one thing is that you can't play with the bioterrorist and that special purple strain because the bioterrorist actually uses that to spread out. But regardless, it's a lot of fun. It's a wonderful expansion to a great game. Very, very well done. Lots of fun, lots of great mechanics, and lots of great new pieces and ways to play and all of that good stuff. Pretty much everything that I personally look for in expansion, Pandemic On the Brink, my number 1. So with that, thank you very much for watching my video on my top 5 favorite expansions. I hope that you enjoyed it, and be sure to put in your favorite expansions to any board game in the comments below, or if you agreed or disagreed with me, say that as well. I had a lot of fun. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video, and I will see you next time.
Well, that's it for me, everybody. Once again, I hope that you liked this video on my top 5 favorite board game expansions. And again, please do put everything that you want to say in the comments below. I love to hear your comments and suggestions. I particularly like hearing about expansions that I either don't know about or haven't played. In the meantime, if you want, you can check out some of my other videos, a few of which are linked up at the top of this page. And if you want to see more in the future, go ahead and click the big giant subscribe button right there in the middle. Thank you very much again, and I will see you next time.